The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, rel-mar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the shores of Lake Ontario, between the city of Toronto and Niagara Falls. If you'd like to send an email, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. And to find about the great programming we have available for you 24/7, 365 on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit www.xzbn.net. And as always, the X-Zone is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and iHeartRadio. And don't forget, we can also be watched on Simul TV. My guest this hour is Erika Mailman, and let's just take a look at her website at www.erikamailman.com. And it says, "Welcome to my website. I write historical fiction, sometimes with a contemporary narrative. If you'd like to travel to medieval Germany, Gold Rush San Francisco, 1892 Massachusetts, or the early Oakland during the fight for suffrage, you've come to the right place." Joining me now is Erika Mailman. And Erika, welcome to the X-Zone.
Thank you so much, Rob. It's nice to talk to you.
Nice talking to you, too. My goodness, tell us a little bit about yourself and how your journey to writing came about.
I've been interested in writing fiction and poetry ever since I was a child. In fourth grade was when I first kind of had the idea I wanted to write. And I've had a long, circuitous journey to publication. And most recently, in October of 2017, my novel, The Murderer's Maid, a Lizzie Borden novel, was released from Yellow Pear Press. And that tells the narrative of the Lizzie Borden double murders, but from a really unusual perspective, which is from the family's Irish maid, Bridget Sullivan, who was the only other person in the house that day besides Lizzie Borden, who everybody believes committed the murders but was acquitted, and the victims.
Tell me, why is the Lizzie Borden story still being told so many years later when there's only been 2 deaths compared to the number of mass murders that are out there these days?
You know, I've spent a lot of time thinking about why do we still care about this very small provincial double murder from 1892, and it's now, 175 years later. Even this summer coming out, we have a major motion picture that's going to be distributed after a Sundance preview starring some pretty spectacular actors. My novel came out, several other novels and nonfiction books came out around the same time. There's just been so much interest, and it continues and continues. And I have 2 theories for why I think we still really care about Lizzie Borden. One of them is that the idea of murdering a parent, and I should say Lizzie is accused of murdering her father and her stepmother, not her natural mother. There's something so taboo about the idea of killing a parent. And if you think about like the ancient stories we have, like Oedipus Rex, there's just such a monumental wrongness to murdering the person who brought you into the world. So I think that's a big part of why we're so interested in this story almost 200 years later. The other reason, I think, is that it seems like if she was indeed guilty, that she got away with it. She was acquitted, lived a long life after the murders. In fact, lived as long after as before, and died an old woman. So I think there's some curiosity about what is it like to have gotten away with such a brutal murder.
So tell us, what happened in Fall River, Massachusetts on August the 4th, 1892?
Well, this was a day that was a very, very hot August day. In fact, the Fall River Health Department had reported some deaths just from heat exhaustion. And that day, in this small home in which Lizzie and her sister Emma, who was older than her, Lizzie was 36, her sister was older, they still lived in the family home. Around this age, they would have been considered, spinsters, women who had missed their chance to marry and go start their own families. So they lived in the home with their elderly father and stepmother, and of course the Irish maid. The older sister Emma was away; she was visiting friends, so it was just Lizzie, the parents, and the maid. And Mr. Borden had breakfast and then went out to walk and do some of his business. Journeying throughout the town of Fall River, Massachusetts. While he was away, Mrs. Borden went upstairs to the guest bedroom, and she was putting a pillowcase on the guest bed and never left that room. She was felled by 19 hatchet blows to her head and one to the back of her upper shoulder. But pretty much everything was focused on her head, a particularly brutal and one would think rage-inspired crime. Some hours passed, and then Mr. Borden came home. He was welcomed into the home and went to sort of rest on the family sitting room sofa and took a nap, we believe, and while he was sleeping was also hatcheted to death with 11 blows. Ooch. So maybe some subdued anger, not quite as much as what his wife Abby faced.
So what was believed to be the motive for the murders?
Well, a lot of people think that if Lizzie had done it, that she was motivated by greed, because Mr. Borden was actually in the money of the time, a millionaire. He was very wealthy. He was on the board of several banks. He was involved in textile mills, which were very booming at the time. But they lived in a neighborhood that was far below what they could have afforded. And some of the sources lead us to believe that she wanted to entertain on a higher level. Maybe she blamed that for why she hadn't had romantic success. I think she just felt trapped in that small, narrow, claustrophobic house. And in fact, after the murders, she and her sister financially benefited. They were the sole heirs because Abby died first, so none of her relatives were in the flow of inheritance. And the sisters took that money and indeed bought a fancy home in that area of town that they coveted living in.
What do we know about Lizzie Borden as a person?
We know that she was moody, and some of the anecdotal stories about her are that she was, fiery-tempered and could snap at people. But she was also having a personality that was very devoted to charitable service and philanthropic kind of benevolence. So she was very, very active in her church. She belonged to a lot of the church organizations like the Fruit and Flower Mission, which brought fruit and flowers to sick, poor women, things like that, where Christian, the temperance movement. She was involved in these kinds of women's circles within the church. So I think... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that doesn't seem to be the kind of person that would hatchet her parents.
Exactly so. And I think maybe that was that conscious on her part? Like, I will build up a reputation in the community for being very good? Or was it just that there was so little else to do that she's like, okay, I guess I'll volunteer on Sunday afternoon so I have something to do after church.
Or is it possible?
Or the third is that she was actually motivated to be a good person, which maybe is the most likely.
There's another possibility.
What's that?
Maybe she didn't kill her parents.
That is absolutely a very strong possibility, and the jurors of 1893 believe that.
What do we know about the Irish Maid?
We know that when she first arrived in the United States from Ireland, she was, I use the phrase restless, because she moved around from state to state in a period of just a few years. And even within Fall River, she had worked for 2 other families before she came to the Bordens. She was somebody who just moved a lot. And we know that she tried to quit with the Bordens because it was such a tense home and joyless, I believe, and Mrs. Borden begged her to stay. And so she did. She stayed a little longer, probably to her detriment, because then she was, pulled into all of the drama around these murders.
You and I have to take our first break. Please stand by, Erika. X-Zone Nation. Erika Mailman is our guest of this hour. She's the author of The Murderer's Maid, a Lizzie Borden novel, and her website is erikamailman.com. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. As I've been telling you, we're going to be moving our studios and corporate offices coming June. We're going to be moving them to 2 places. Our Canadian corporate offices will be moved to Niagara, Ontario, where the X-Zone started over 28 years ago. And we're also opening up corporate and studios in Sarasota, Florida. So the X-Zone will be coming to you 6 months of the year from Niagara, Ontario, and 6 months of the year from Sarasota, Florida. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell. Don't go away. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com. Erika Mailman is my guest this hour, Explanation. She's the author of, are you ready for this? The Murderer's Maid, a Lizzie Borden novel. Chop, 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 chop. Oh, my goodness. Why do we pay all the attention to Lizzie Borden and not the others who could have been suspect?
That's an excellent question. Lizzie wasn't immediately suspected right after the two bodies were discovered, and they were discovered separately, I should point out, in some really weird and suspicious way, in which Lizzie suggested that people go upstairs after her father's body had been located because maybe I heard my stepmother come in. You better go check. Anyway, she wasn't immediately suspected, and so for several days she just kept sleeping in her room. And although the house was a live crime scene, it was very loosely treated. Police were stationed outside, but not inside. So there was certainly any number of ways in which Lizzie or any other guilty persons could have hidden evidence or changed things within the home. And in fact, Andrew and Abby, the victims, also stayed there overnight and were autopsied in the dining room. There was a thought that there was probably some enraged person who had bad business dealings with Mr. Borden, who came in and killed him and also his wife. Right. For me, I kind of wonder why, if you're so angry at Mr. Borden that you will also kill his defenseless and innocent wife, why was then not Lizzie also attacked? Because she was in the house during the time of both murders.
But were both of them found in the same bed?
No, Mrs. Borden was found upstairs in the guest room, face down on the floor next to the bed where she had been changing a pillowcase. Mr. Borden was found on the main floor of the home on the sitting room sofa. So he came home not knowing his wife was already upstairs dead at that point. And we believe there was, like an hour and a half between the two murders. Enough time had elapsed that her digestive system was at a different stage than his was, which is important when you think about the line of inheritance, that if he died first, all of his wealth goes to his wife and then her, relatives. Lizzie and her sister hated Abby and her relations, which would help defend the idea that maybe Lizzie had killed her. So because Mrs. Borden did die first, all of her share in the Borden wealth went then to her husband and then thence to his children only.
What about the people of the town? How did they react to the murder? Did they think that Lizzie was guilty?
No, right away people were so outraged and upset that Lizzie was considered capable of murder. Everybody kind of circled around her to say, like, oh, how could they think you could do something so brutal? You're a wonderful woman. You're so involved in church work. But as time went on and Lizzie failed her inquest, I guess you could say, she was found, quote, probably guilty at the inquest and then arrested. And she spent close to a year in prison, in jail, awaiting her trial in June of 1893. And during that time, I think people's support of her started to wane. Some of her closest friends, including Alice Russell, converted from being people who would testify in her defense to people who would testify against her and help the prosecution. So I think emotions cooled, and after she was acquitted and went to live in her home that had a name of Maplecroft in Fall River, she stayed in Fall River but just moved to a nicer neighborhood. People would pull up carts to meet the train and charge people, like day trippers, to drive to her house, and they would stand outside and narrate while she was inside, probably able to hear some of the shouted narration about her supposed crimes. Also,
just like they're doing these days when they stay there as a bed and breakfast.
Exactly so.
Some things never change, eh? Follow the money.
Yeah, people are interested in the lurid nature of this crime, and little children would ring her doorbell and then run away. Those kinds of things, those kinds of small cruelties, and also, of course, the rhyme. The jump rope rhyme is supposed to have been, like a childish invention with which they taunted her. And it may be worth saying that rhyme just because it's so well known.
Sure, go ahead.
And it's a lot of people's first introduction, in fact, mine, to the whole circumstances of this case. And it's Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. So she was tormented. She was cut on the street, that old-fashioned word that means she would be approaching somebody on the street and they would kind of cut their chin away from her and pretend they didn't see her. And actually, I was listening to something just earlier today that suggested that maybe that was less because they thought she was guilty and maybe more just because she had been tainted by the whole distastefulness of spending close to a year in jail and being touched by the distasteful events of this double murder. So that's a possibility, too. Maybe they were just like, this isn't genteel and ladylike, and so I'm just going to pretend I don't see you.
Tell me about the trial.
All right. So that took place starting in June of 1893. The murders had been in August of 1892, so almost a year later. It had some very theatrical moments, including the skulls of Mr. and Mrs. Borden were produced in trial. The bodies had been, unbeknownst to Emma and Lizzie, the daughters, had been decapitated during a second autopsy that took place in the town cemetery. In an outbuilding at the cemetery, not outside. And a doctor had taken those heads and rendered them down to the bone. In other words, he had boiled them on his kitchen stove. And they were shown to the jurors because by the prosecution, because the thought was that, oh my gosh, look at what little is left of these skulls. Like, this is how hard these people were hit over and over again. And they thought that this would be a dramatic way of showing how vicious the crimes have been. But it actually backfired because there was this sense of Lizzie as this very retiring and kindly woman. And so, of course, the jurors saw those skulls and thought, she's not capable of having done that. No woman could lift a hatchet and bring it down that many times into people's skulls. And the aspect of it that was the most dramatic was that the skulls had been kept in a little satchel. They were going to have, a big reveal, but the attorney went to grab something else on his table, and the skulls kind of tumbled out of the bag, and Lizzie actually fainted in court at the site. So I'm sure that was just an extraordinary moment in a courtroom to see that happen.
I would imagine so. How long did it take the jury to come up with the not guilty verdict?
They took an hour, but it is said that actually they stretched that out to make it seem like they had been taking their duty more seriously, because really they just pretty much instantly knew that they were going to acquit her, and they didn't believe it was possible she could have committed these crimes.
If the jury found her not guilty, how come she was never vindicated by the townspeople?
Well, that is the question of the centuries, because I read through the trial transcripts myself. They're online, by the way. If anybody's listening, just start Googling. You can find them in their entirety. I just feel that it's so ludicrous, the contradictions that Lizzie Borden gave her. Just there are many other circumstances I haven't mentioned yet. Like soon after she was soon after she learned that she was suspected, she burned a dress of hers in her kitchen stove at home.
Right.
Which is just like very strange timing. Your house is a crime scene and you're suddenly burning a dress. There was somebody who was going to testify that Lizzie had tried to buy prussic acid, which is a poison, in the days right before the murders. And in fact, everybody in the household was vomiting before the murders, and Bridget was vomiting the day of. And the doctor who lived kitty corner from them, Mrs. Borden, went to see him the day before she was killed to say, I feel like somebody's poisoning us. So there are just so many, many little details that when you one by one you could discount them, but when you have this kind of critical mass, I just feel, I of course reserve judgment that she may have been innocent, but my gut feeling is that she was not.
So if she was found guilty innocent by her peers, why continue the story? To me, it's all right. She was charged with murder. She was found not guilty. Life goes on. Oobla-dee, oobla-da.
Well, yeah, I guess it's just one of those things. I'm one of those people who's so fascinated by history that I focus on like one kind of a thing at a time, and I obsess about it. I read everything I can about it. And I think about it endlessly, and I think that this particular case has that appeal to some people because it is so strange and because it seems so miraculous that she was acquitted.
You and I have to take our break after the news. We'll be right back. Exo Nation, our guest this hour is Erika Mailman. Her website is erikamailman.com. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. Don't go away. We'll be back in a few minutes. From our broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond, you're watching the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media Demo.
The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State-certified occupational school, training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God, It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. Welcome back, everyone. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 7 a.m. Eastern. No, I don't do this show all by myself that time. We do the live version from 10 until 2, and then from 2 until 7, it's the best of after everybody is settled into their bed. We want to scare the heck out of a few people. Exonation, my guest this hour is Erika Mailman. We're talking about Lizzie Borden. She's the author of The Murderer's Maid, a Lizzie Borden novel. I understand you actually stayed in the Lizzie Borden house.
I did. Back in August of 2016, I spent the night, and I had been very loath to do that for a lot of reasons. One of which is, as much as I am attracted to the morbid nature of the crime, I also realized that this was a tragedy for Andrew and Abby Borden, and that if there are ghosts and they still are there, they're probably tormented by the gleeful nature with which people visit the home and look at where they died. But my editor really insisted that I go spend the night because I was going to the East Coast anyway. And she's like, you got to swing by, you got to spend the night. There's also, besides my book being a historical narrative from Bridget Sullivan's point of view, it also has a contemporary narrative with a modern day woman who actually goes and spends the night in the house. So it really made sense for me to go so I could write those scenes with some veracity. So I went and I got an old college friend to spend the night with me because there was no way I was going to stay there by myself. And we stayed in Bridget Sullivan's attic room. And initially I was excited because the two murders happened on the ground floor and the first floor, and we were going to be up on the second floor. So I was thinking, we're made in the shade. Yeah. We're not going to be facing anything. And as soon as we showed up, we parked in the back lot where the orchard once was that Lizzie Borden famously claimed she was eating pears while murders happened. Now it's a paved parking lot. As soon as we entered the house, we were told by a tour guide, she said, oh, you're up on the third floor. You're near the most haunted part of the house. So I was like, no, are you kidding me about this? So it's a really interesting stay. And I totally hand it to the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast people because they give an utterly respectful tour of the home, and it's so thorough. There's our tour guide was Colleen Johnson. She had an encyclopedic memory of and knowledge of the Borden case, and of course I had been reading up like crazy because I was writing a book, and so I could ask her questions and she knew all the answers, and she knew many things that I hadn't encountered yet. It was just a wonderful tour. It takes 2 hours to go through this house from attic to cellar, stopping in every room and learning all the facts. And you would think a 2-hour tour of a small home would be a little bit of maybe a drag. Oh, it's so spectacularly interesting. It's so well done. And after you have your 2-hour tour, you get to eat snickerdoodles. And then they leave you with the other guests in the home alone. And when we realized that, we, who were all strangers to each other, we were staying in the different rooms of the home. We're like, wait a minute, you're going? You're leaving us here by ourselves? And she's like, yep, there's a phone in the kitchen if you need to call 911. So it's really an interesting, trust-driven kind of business because there you are in this historic home and you're with other people who are interested in the case, who you met a few hours earlier.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said business.
Yeah.
You know, it's a cash cow. What else is there to do in that part of Massachusetts? What else is there in Fall River?
Well, it's pretty interesting. I have some fairly fresh news. Maplecroft, which is I mentioned earlier, is the home where Lizzie and her sister moved to after the murders. That has been purchased by the same couple, and they are trying to outfit that as well as at least a place to tour, if not to stay overnight.
No, say it's not. Say it's not so. Say they're not going to turn that into another cash cow.
Well, I think that there probably is enough interest for them to open the second home. And I think really for Fall River, it's something that they do need to capitalize upon, because that's why a lot of people come to Fall River. They have this interest in it. And so why not treat it respectfully and as respectfully as possible and use that. I mean, certainly, if you're interested in this case, the idea that you could walk inside Maplecroft is pretty interesting. I'd actually really like to see it. I'm going to be returning to Fall River this summer. If anybody in Ontario, Toronto area wants to head towards Massachusetts, I'll be there June 7th, actually doing a presentation in the public library in Fall River about Lizzie Borden and about my book. And there's also Oh, go ahead.
No. Keep going.
I was going to say there's also a cemetery, Oak Grove, which is, as I said, where the bodies were decapitated. And there's a big Borden plot there with all of the Bordens, including a sister who had been born and died soon between the two sisters, Alice. And it's really fascinating when you walk into the cemetery. There's big painted arrows on the pavement, just directing you straight to the Borden plot, as if you wouldn't be visiting any other folks there. It's a little bit like you're saying that there is a certain tour based thinking there. Like, wow, people want to find that plot.
But doesn't anybody find this totally disrespectful to the dead? Like, come on.
Well, I'm one of them, Rob. I am one of them. I had severe reservations about it. I just think about the fact that if I had been hatcheted and lay face down on the floor and people were talking about my weight, because there was discussions about, like, how could you be in the house and not hear this close to 200-pound woman hit the floor? And she died in a house dress, kind of plain, to the degree that they were saying, clearly she didn't leave the house because she was in her plain house dress. It was so, I would think, humiliating.
But how many murders are committed? How many murders are committed each and every day in the United States with a hell of a lot more violence than Lizzie Borden's case could ever imagine to have? And people say, well, that's it. Nobody writes about it. Nobody makes a tourist trap out of it. Nobody is disrespectful to the dead by going to these cemeteries and gawking. I don't get it.
Okay, I have one other theory to offer why this is attractive.
All right.
I think that the Victorian era was so death-based. Their mourning practices were so severe. We all know about, like, the stationery with the black rims that, is the stationery you write your letters on after somebody has died. You have to wear widow's weeds for a certain number of months or even years after someone you love has died, depending on depending on who that person was to you. And the mementos, like the brooches people would wear that were braided pieces of a dead person's hair because you loved them and wanted to keep a piece of them with you. There was so much death in the Victorian era anyway. I think that we tend to romanticize that era. And when I think about, like, Sherlock Holmes or Jack the Ripper, and you think about that London covered in fog and how there's something kind of mysterious to the bloody murderousness. I mean, when you look at the photos of what Jack the Ripper did, you're just so appalled. And yet there's something kind of strangely romantic, attractive perhaps, about that fog-covered city. What do you think about that?
Doesn't do anything for me.
Well, you, me, and Andrew and Abby Borden can agree on that. I think there's something shameful and sad about it.
I'm an ex-cop, and I've gone to many homicide scenes, and I don't find anything to do with a homicide to any degree that should be glorified, in which the manner of the Lizzie Borden case has been glorified, and to make money from a crime scene, in my view, it's despicable.
I'm sitting here kind of nodding and trying to think about how to approach it. I don't want to defend it.
No, listen, you're entitled to your views, and I'm not taking anything away from you.
Let me say this: I would not have purchased the home to set it up as a bed and breakfast. That would not be my impulse. Mm-hmm. However, as somebody who's so fascinated by history, would I have wanted to walk through that house? Yes.
But what historical value does it have? I don't understand this point. Okay, the ghoulish part, I know there's a lot of wackos out there who love this Ghostbuster stuff. I know it. But when like anybody who wants to spend time in a cemetery looking for a dead person's ghost, to my mind, is not a very sane person. But hey, people do it all the time.
Well, think about the fact that there's a whole line of the genre of murder mysteries that are called cozies. As if it's like a cozy, like pull up your blanket and let's read about somebody being brutally murdered. That is strange. I agree.
It is. I would rather bring my iPad to bed with me, kiss my wife goodnight, and watch Netflix. But that's just me. All right, we'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.
All right.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howell will expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com.
I'm William S. Peckham. If you enjoy a good mystery with a touch of the paranormal, then you'll love my novel, From Out of the Woodwork. It's the story of a young Toronto contractor, Sean Kennedy, who buys derelict homes, guts them, and turns them into multi-family dwellings. Slums just waiting to happen. When Sean buys 29 Livery Lane, the house fights back. former owners unexpectedly come out of the woodwork as he starts the destruction. The apparitions come to him when he touches old books, reads hidden letters, rummages through old boxes, finds a locket, or reads a discovered manuscript of a murder mystery. From Out of the Woodwork will take you from 1899 to the horror of the World Trade Center, September 11, 2001. Check out From Out of the Woodwork on my website, www.williamspeckham.com.
Welcome back, everyone. Erika Mailman is my special guest this hour, www.erikamailman.com. She's the author of The Murderer's Maid, a Lizzie Borden novel. If, in fact, Lizzie Borden did not kill her parents, and was there any investigation into who did?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, there was a lot of investigation, although maybe not to the level that we would have wished. There were investigations into people who had business dealings with Mr. Borden who may have harbored resentments against him. There were some specific people who were targeted. There was talk of a Portuguese man. There was talk of somebody who outside town limits was sitting on a log weeping, saying, "Poor Mrs. Borden, poor Mrs. Borden." So they did try to follow leads, and including Lizzie had said, there was a period of time where Mrs. Borden was lying upstairs undiscovered but dead. Lizzie had said Mrs. Borden went out. She got a note from a sick friend to come and visit her. And so there was an ad in the paper where they were offering a reward for anybody who could come forward and say, like, I was the one who sent the note, or I know who was sick. Nobody came forward. And this case just fizzled out. It's a cold case file.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, every year on the anniversary of the murders, the Fall River newspaper would run this front page, totally tongue-in-cheek, taunting headline about, a year later, we still haven't found the culprit. 20 years later, we still haven't found the culprit. So that was a little bit of needling Lizzie, like, we know you're guilty, so, like, why can't the police come up with the actual murderer? Because there isn't one. I think the police work was not fine that day. I described some of the things previously where the house was left unattended to people inside who could hide evidence, maneuver things around. In particular, the idea that if Lizzie had been wearing a dress while she committed these murders, they should be blood-stained, blood-spattered. And so officers did go through this, what they called a clothes press. It was a room for clothing storage. But at the time that they went through it, they were only looking for a potentially hidden murderer man. So they were just kind of like thrusting dresses aside off of their nails without really looking at the dresses themselves to see if there was blood on them. Lizzie did change her dress sometime after both bodies were discovered. So she may have hidden a bloodstained dress inside of another dress in the clothes press. And then later, as I described, she had burned a dress in the kitchen stove, and that was witnessed and shared with law enforcement.
While you were at the Lizzie Borden place, did you see any ghosts? Did you hear anything strange, weird, wonderful, bizarre?
That's really interesting. I didn't feel anything, and I was definitely open-minded about what I might sense there. My friend also who stayed there with me just felt like it's just an old tired house. There's nothing here. If there was anything, it is long gone. There's a lot of paranormal investigations that take place at the house. And in fact, while we were there was a man who had set up a laptop, like a heat sensitive camera that he left trained on the sofa all night long to see if something arose. So yeah, I had a strange nightmare, but that doesn't really surprise me. That was really the only thing. My friend, we were that morning after we survived the night. She was like, I feel perfectly fine. I'm just going to go down to the kitchen and start the coffee brewing. I'm like, okay, great. I was writing in my journal or something. And she goes, you want to go down with me? So she felt brave, but ultimately she couldn't go down the 3 stories by herself. I had to go with her.
Tell us about some of the other books you've written.
Oh, I have a novel called The Witches Trinity, which is about medieval witchcraft, about an elderly woman who's accused of witchcraft by her own daughter-in-law, based on the statistical anomaly from medieval Germany, that was often the case. Mm-hmm. I have a novel called The House of Believer, which is set in an actual house museum in Oakland, California, a governor's mansion, but I fictionalized it, and it's a literary ghost story. And then Woman of Ill Fame is my novel about a gold rush prostitute who gets caught up in a serial killer's net and has to figure her way out of it.
Wow, you've gone right across the spectrum.
Well, the thing that all 4 of them have in common is like a strong woman protagonist. I think I am looking at the women of history who haven't always had a voice and giving them a voice. Maids, prostitutes, the elderly, people whose names we don't remember, like the kings and queens, but people whose lives were nonetheless very important.
How so?
Because every life is important.
I understand that, but there's a big difference between the life and times of a king or queen to that of a prostitute.
Well, I don't know. The prostitute herself might say my life is equally valuable or more so to me because it's mine. And I think that harks to what we were just talking about before the break, that, murder is despicable because it's the end of that one person, and each life is supremely valuable.
Oh, I'm not saying that murder is not despicable and that all life is very valuable. What I'm saying is that why waste time on writing about a prostitute when there are such other people who have contributed so much to the evolution and to society? That would...
Well, maybe if that prostitute's birth had been of better circumstances, she would have been a queen and would have affected the roll of time.
And if my aunt had been my uncle, things would have been different as well. It's just like all the stories now coming out about Stormy Daniels and the president. Who gives a damn, for God's sake? She's a sex trade worker. Do you think that anybody with half a brain in their head would give her any respect? I don't.
Oh, wow. I feel like there's some people who circumstances push them into choices they wouldn't otherwise make. And especially in the era in which I set my book in the 1800s, where really if you didn't have a male kin to protect you, to provide shelter, food, you have to put food on your table one way or another. And I actually have the admiration of those women who managed to thrive in the worst of circumstances.
You break the law, you suffer the consequences.
At different points in our history, even in our country's history, prostitution has been completely legal, and in some places, like in San Francisco, this is pretty interesting. In San Francisco and in Oakland, in a certain turn of the other century time period, not only was prostitution legal, but it was endorsed by the police department, and you would go and get like a pass book from the police. You would register. It was almost like a passport. Your photo was in it. And the pages that were stamped by a doctor every few weeks to prove that you were clear of venereal disease. So a potential visitor could ask to see your book and be like, okay, everything's clean and good to go. So, people might argue that having registration is a good way to control it.
Not this boy. Nay.
All right, we'll talk off the air. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, really? Okay. What do you want to share?
Oh, no. I just mean never mind.
What's that?
That was a bad joke.
Oh. Behind every bad joke is a bit of honesty. No. It goes to air the way we do it.
I was told there'd be editing and cake.
Well, the cake is here. The editing They lied. Hey, listen,
All right. Well, it's hard to be judgmental when we don't know what these women faced. And, you know, if your situation is so dire that you're going to die.
But we could say the same thing for bank robbers. We could say the same thing for drug dealers. We could say same things for the illegal immigrants that are crossing the borders. You know, we can always make an excuse for somebody who is breaking the law. But at the end of the day, there is no excuse.
I would argue that some of those things you mentioned were not illegal.
What's not?
Yeah.
What's not illegal?
Well, I just talked to you about how at certain time periods prostitution was not illegal.
I agree. I'm talking about today's society.
Well, I'm a historical novelist, and I guess my head's in the 1800s most of the time.
Wow. Listen, I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's been a great pleasure talking to you and X-Zone Nation. Let me just see something here. X-Zone Nation, if you'd like to get more information about our guest, Erika Mailman, who is the author of The Murderer's Maid, a Lizzie Borden novel. Her website is www.erikamailman.com. You know, darn it, Craig, I forgot to ask her one very important question. And I'll send it out to you, the X-Zone Nation. If Lizzie Borden would have been Leonard Borden, male, would this story still be perpetuated by authors and throughout history? I think not. And if Lizzie Borden was found innocent by the members of society who were part of that jury, what right does anyone have to perpetrate and continue questioning the legalities of her innocence? Because they're only doing it to make money. It's a cash cow. And any city, municipality, who allows this to happen, man, you guys are despicable. It's just like those whack jobs in Roswell, New Mexico about the UFOs and the aliens and everything else. Give your head a shake. Reality time check, everyone. We'll be back on the other side of this news break at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour. Whatever you do, don't go away, because I'll be back.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifeology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com.
Are you or is someone you know struggling with addictions, depression, anxiety, relationships, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, grief, success, and prosperity? Do you know that your subconscious belief plays a big role in the outcome of your hard work? We can help you permanently change the beliefs that may be the reason for your struggles and failures. We care about getting you the return on your investment and the results you are looking for. We can help you be free of the limitations of your past and in realizing your highest potential. We work with people by phone and Skype. For more information, visit us at www.ritasoman.com. That's www.ritasoman.com.
Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.